Yeah, I was just going to follow up on, Bob mentioned that there's, in many cases, a grain of truth to this. And of course, one thing that people go back to was the Chinese spy balloon, which was,
Oh, yeah.
that was not a mistake. That was not an illusion. That was a real thing. And it did manage to cross much of the country. I don't think it was a terrible failure of security. I mean, but the point is that this, it was a real thing, and we, of course, we have there was that the hoax, the kid who went up in the balloon, the Falcon kid, and I love that story, and of
Or,
course
or
Brian has
or or
talked.
didn't go up in the balloon. I don't remember the outcome of that. He was,
Well, they thought he went up. They said he climbed in the balloon, and it turned
but
out,
he really
this
didn't
whole.
go up in the balloon. Yeah.
I'm sure many of our listeners are too young to remember this, but we do. And at one point, Brian was doing, and this is one of the things I. So, Brian, tell us real quick about the man, the jetpack guy, the scene, because this is kind of relevant.
Oh, the jetpack guy, yeah. When I don't remember the dates. It happened twice. It happened a long time ago, and then it happened again, I don't know, within a year or two ago, around LAX. And pilots had reported seeing a guy in a jetpack flying around. And, I one of the first things I did was I went and, okay, what's the current state of jetpack technology? And I spoke to one of the engineers at one of the two or three companies that actually are successfully selling these commercial jetpacks. And no, they can't remotely get to the altitudes that these pilots were saying, and they can't stay up there for very long. And even if you could, that would be prohibitively dangerous because you can't go up to 10,000 feet and then hope to have enough fuel to make it back down safely. You're going to fall to your death almost certainly. So it wasn't someone in a drone. And with one or two of the pictures that came out, I think it was the guys on the Metabunk forums that found the matching balloon. Here's the balloon that you can buy that looks just like this picture. And nobody would accept it because everyone had heard it's a guy in a jetpack. And that was just the preferred narrative that everyone wanted to believe because it's cool and it's exciting and it's sensational. And no, I won't accept it.
This is Fox Mulder's poster. I want to believe.
I want to, yeah, for sure.
Wow. So, I wanted to ask you guys about something, and I brought this up when I was trying to explain what this possibly could be to people over the weekend. That there was a similar thing hundreds of years ago, before there were any airships in the sky. I think it's called the Great Airship Hoax of 1890 or something like that, right?
I think one of us wrote a lot about that. Who would that
All right.
be?
So Ben, tell us about this, Ben.
No,
Tell us
we need to
about it.
talk to Bob about this.
Oh,
That is,
Rob.
I know some about
Ah,
this, but
Robert
this
wrote
is
about
this
this.
is Bob's wheelhouse. So
Okay, so
That,
please tell us
yeah.
about this and how it's connected.
Well, it's a great airship wave of 1896, 1897. There were literally, and I'm not exaggerating, thousands of individual reports in just about every newspaper across the United States. And the belief at the time was that some American had invented an airship, a heavier than air flying machine, and was testing it out. And there have been, that was a massive wave. And then you had
And
these sighting waves
just to
over
be clear,
time, right?
basically, just to be clear, this was
Yep,
before there were any airplanes, right? Right.
that's
So,
correct.
right.
Yep, that's correct. But then you had the New England wave of 1909 with Wallace Tillinghast, who supposedly invented this flying machine, and there were all sorts of sightings there. Most of them correlated with Venus in the evening. Then you've got, you got all these sighting waves throughout history in Sweden and Scandinavian countries,
Oh, yeah.
Flyer X in the 1930s. You had the Scandinavian ghost rockets in 1946. And Ben and Brian would know about the Kenneth Arnold sighting in the summer of 1947. The interesting thing there was he reported seeing these crescent-shaped objects. But the newspaper journalist Bill Buckett at the Oregonian put it on the Associated Press wire as a flying disc. And the next thing you know, everyone was seeing flying discs. They weren't seeing crescent-shaped objects, right? And so this just keeps happening over and over again. And the interesting thing about 1947 was that a Gallup poll was taken shortly after that wave, and less than 1% considered the possibility of extraterrestrials. about 30% thought it could be a United States or foreign, possibly Russian secret weapon. So, and the last thing I'll mention is there were a whole series of aeroplane waves back around World War I across the eastern seaboard. You had New Jersey, Delaware, New Hampshire, and these went in clusters. And the belief was that it was German sympathizers flying these planes at night as and reconnaissance missions and as a prelude to a possible attack to drop bombs. But the planes of that period, it was very dangerous to fly at night and to do the maneuvers they were said to be doing. It was just impossible. And most of these sightings, again, correlated with Venus, not surprisingly. And so these scares, like the drone scare, the flying saucer wave of 1947, these sightings, these clusters, tend to reflect prevailing fears. They're like this Rorschach inkblot test of whatever's going on. They're signs of the times. They tell us more about us than about what's possibly up there.
Yeah, I mean, just keep in mind, as he pointed out, I mean, the explanations are almost universally nefarious. It's never a friend. It's never something fun. It's always the government, or it's the Russians, or it's the Chinese, or it's always the attribution is almost invariably malicious, and that speaks to what Bob was saying.
I speak of the devil, and he is bound to appear. Right?
I love that quote.
And the other one from Shakespeare is, or in the night, imagining some fear, how easy is a bush, suppose it a bear.
Wow. Okay, so I'm going to read you a quote. Guess who said this just the other day? I think they'd be better off saying what it is. Our military knows, and our president knows, and for some reason they want to keep people in suspense. Anybody know? Anybody want to guess who said that?
Well, it's not Marjorie Taylor
Elon Musk,
because she wouldn't refer to.
No, that was our next president. That was President Trump.
Well, here's the thing. So if Trump, no president or ex-president has managed to weaponize conspiracy theories in the way, and I've written about this in SI and elsewhere, and it's just remarkable to me because if what he's saying is true, he said advisedly, then all this will be cleared up on Trump's first day in office, because if what he's saying is true, that that this is all some Biden knows what's going on, this Harris is in on it. If this is all true, then presumably on day one he's going like, hey, I'm now, you're welcome. I'm now revealing the terrible things that Biden did to you. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, this is the most of all the bizarre things, because that's right. It's a few weeks, and then he will be in charge of the military, which he says they know. So I don't get his plan there. It's like, bizarre.
There's no plan, Rob. there's no plan. That's not what he does.
There's concepts of a plan.
Very good. All right. Well, I want to give you guys a chance to tell everybody what you've been writing about this so people can go look at it. Unless you guys have something before we get to that. Anything else you want to talk about?
I was just going to mention just a couple minutes ago when you're talking about what was it called? The balloon panic of 1896, 97?
Airship, I think.
Airship panic. Okay, so that dovetails into one of my favorite urban legends, which is the claim that there is an actual alien buried in Aurora, Texas, in a cemetery. And
I've not heard this one.
You haven't heard this one? I mean, it's
No.
on History Channel and all of these channels and everything, and all of the UFO, like MUFON and all of the UFO groups have gone down there and done their investigations. And it was absolutely astonishing to me when I found out what happened. In 1897, which was when this was going on, and it was in all the newspapers, one of the Texas newspapers had a little contest. They say, I'm not sure if it was a contest or if it was just a collection of their favorite airship stories from newspapers. And so these two guys in this little town of Aurora, Texas, sent in their own airship story, which was that an airship came and it crashed and it knocked over the judge's windmill, and the alien was killed, and they buried him in the town cemetery. And they threw in all of these little hooks, like they were naming all of these people in town and giving them all these lofty positions. It was very obviously a joke. And so it was printed in, it was Houston or Dallas, one of the major newspapers. It was printed in this collection of the best stories of airships.
But it wasn't presented as fiction when it was.
But no, it clearly was. It clearly was presented as fiction. You can get that page of the newspaper. I found that I looked at it. It's probably linked on my episode about it. And it's, here's the best stories, and they're all obviously joke stories. And based on the strength of that alone, you've got UFO networks today who still believe that that is a literal account of an alien crashing in Texas. It boggles the imagination. It's what is this, cognitive dissonance? I mean, how you can see something that is so obviously fiction, but because you've already decided it must be a literal true account, nothing can change your mind on that.
Yeah, I mean, my previous article in Skeptical Inquirer was titled "Some People Just Want to Believe," and it was about this whole UFO thing, and especially these people who are deep in the UFO movement, which you know of them all. They have made their careers in this regard, right? And they're making money on this. And why are they going to see anything that's going to make them change their mind and have to publicly admit they're wrong? And even if you're not somebody making money on it, well, like, have you guys seen the documentary Behind the Curve about the Flat Earth movement?
I'm aware of it. I have not.
You need to
I've
watch
not
it.
yet found an hour and a half of my life where I
Yeah. It's astounding. It really shows why these people believe it. And the thing I came away with, it's like a religion. They are afraid to back out of it. They ask Sergeant, what would you change your mind if you got evidence of it? Of course I would change my mind. No, he wouldn't. He's famous because of this. He writes books. He's the featured speaker at conferences. He would not look at anything that would make him want to change his mind. And even if you're not at that level, if you're a flat earther, like they actually showed somebody, I think it was in that documentary, though it could have been in another one I watched, where somebody threw their child out of the house after they, went to college and learned the earth was actually a sphere, because he was raising him as a flat earther. And how dare you disagree with me on that? And so people are afraid they're going to lose their social circle. And why would they do that? So people just want to continue to believe what they want to believe. That's my
Some
take
of
on
these things, I think, are anti-scientific symbols in a secular age. Like sightings of Bigfoot. Science says that, well, there's no fossils, body, bones, or DNA evidence. There's no credible evidence for Bigfoot. Yet Farmer Joe down the road saw it. And all these sightings that, nobody can explain. Well, if science can't explain those or have got those wrong, then perhaps they got religion wrong as well. So I think it does feed into that narrative.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of what's going on with these it's very easy to is in some ways it reminds me of the phantom attacker panic. In fact, Bob has a new book about that he'll talk about. But for example, there was the there you go.
social panics and phantom attackers.
Because I did some there was of course the evil clown panic of 2016, where people across the country, in some cases around the world, were reporting scary clowns jumping out at them. And
There's
in some
one right
cases,
behind Robert, right behind Robert.
right behind Robert, I see him there. Brian, I want you to keep an eye on it. If that thing moves, you tell me, right? But I mean, that's what was going on. It's like, so it was this mix of it was hoaxes, it was actual sightings of just ordinary people. There were copycats and things like that. And part of the idea was that, again, I talk about democratizing this, and this is the same thing's happening here, right? If you want to make the news, if you want to be cool on social media, you post your bullshit sighting of some light in the sky, and suddenly you're being quoted, your video's going viral and things like that. And maybe it's an honest mistake. Maybe it's just sort of like, hey, I want some likes and clicks, and here's my weird video. And of course, as all four of us know, because we've done this a long time, oftentimes there will be videos that are taken at the time which the person that's taking the video has a pretty good idea of what it is. It gets stripped out. We've seen this over and over and over, right? You see a video where if you track down the first person, like, yeah, I knew what that was, but 2 generations later or 2 weeks later, the context is stripped out. It's put in this mystery mongering context, and all of a sudden you have this the latest drone sighting.
So I want to ask you guys if you've ever heard of the logical fallacy. It's fairly new. It was invented or coined, I guess you'd use the word, in only 2018 by somebody named David Kyle Johnson in a book called Countless Counterfeits. Ring a bell? Oh, okay. So this fallacy, and when committing this fallacy, one mistakenly assumes that if a large amount of evidence for a claim exists, even if all evidence to date has been examined and invalidated, it's likely that some as yet uninvestigated piece of evidence must be real and true. How does, I think that might apply to a lot of these things.
Yep.
Right. Like I could see that with Bigfoot for people who want to believe in Bigfoot. Oh, okay, you found out the guy hoaxed that, or that was a costume, or that was, fake scat, or whatever. But there's so many reports. Some of them have to be true, and that's
I mean, I've
clearly
always
the thing with
noted the opposite,
UFOs.
that when you've got a ton of, when you have so much terrible evidence for Bigfoot and zero good evidence, I'm thinking that you almost have evidence that there is no good evidence because all of it's bad. And if you're just selecting evidence by random chance, if there is good evidence and bad evidence out there and you're selecting it by random chance, some of it's going to be good. But when you select it over 75 years and all of it's bad, to me, you're starting to approach evidence that there is no good evidence.
So how long do we have to go with this before that's realized? And any of these topics, UFOs, Bigfoot, the main ones, not just the current drones.
That's the lesson. The lesson from this podcast and what we're talking about is they don't get the lesson, right? Because the mistakes are made over and over again. And look, there's so much misinformation out there and so little critical thinking that many people have stopped searching for information. And instead, they're searching for confirmation and affirmation of pre-existing beliefs. In psychology, known as confirmation bias, right? The tendency to seek out information that reinforces our pre-existing stereotypes. So for me, that's the takeaway from this. Are we going to learn a lesson from this? No, because it'll happen again, and it'll happen again and again and again.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that real quick. As one of my interests, as longstanding, is of course in folklore, and I've spoken to folklore conferences and this and that. And one of my favorite fairy tales, just to sort of go off on a tangent, is The Emperor's New Clothes. Let me ask you three: do you know how that story ends? Rob, do you know how that story ends?
Yeah, I think.
How does the story end?
For some reason, they finally get that he actually was naked.
Okay, so there's a young boy, and there's a parade, and the emperor's going, and the kid points and says, "You have no clothes." All right, Brian, how do you remember that story ending?
I have no recollection of how it ends.
Bob? See, here's the kicker. Most people, when they think about that fairy tale, they think, well, obviously, the emperor is going down. He's been fooled by these tailors into wearing this magical, resplendent clothes, and yet the innocent child is the only one that has the audacity to point out and tell everybody that the emperor has no clothes. And at that point, everyone understands and says, "Oh my God, I was wrong." That's not how the story ends. The story ends with the young boy pointing out to the emperor and everyone else on the streets, the emperor is wearing no clothes. They pause and they continue on, and they don't acknowledge it. That's how the story ends.
Oh my God, this is Mandela effect, man.
I thought you were going to say they killed the kid,
Only in the really sick German versions.
Right. Yeah.
They feed him to Krampus, in the German version. Okay, Ben, I'm skeptical of this. I'm going to have to look
it up. I did a podcast on it.
I am positive that, if you made me bet money, I would have bet money that it ended the way I thought it ended. That's a good one. That is a good one. Okay, so let's end this with you guys talking about where people can see the material, your general material, and also the ones specifically you've written about this recent kerfuffle. I'll start with you, Ben.
Yes, I am around and about. As you mentioned, I am the deputy editor for Skeptical Inquirer magazine, have been for 26 years, which surprises nobody more than me. I am a columnist in every issue for the past 15 years or so. I also have a podcast called Squaring the Strange, which I'm told is pretty good. And yeah, I did a piece for Barry Carr at Skeptical Inquirer on this topic. I've written on it several times, but most recently last week.
And Brian?
So I'm best known for Skeptoid.com, the Skeptoid podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And we don't do current events on the podcast. We do evergreen topics. So famous mysteries, famous urban legends. We've done 1,000 of them. But when there is current events, like for example, this drone thing, which a month from now, nobody's going to remember that it happens. That's why I wouldn't cover it on the podcast.
We'll have bigger problems a month from now, Brian.
So I have my personal Substack, just briandunning.substack.com, where I cover some of these current events, and I don't have any constraints on what I can and can't say.
Yes, and you advertise that on your Facebook page, which is where I've seen them.
Yeah, I post links to them there.
And Robert, you've been publishing about this and other things, of course, in Psychology Today, correct?
Yeah, my column of, I think 3 days ago has over 50,000 views, so that did pretty well. And yeah, so I have a column with Psychology Today, and I continue to write books. I have this book right here on phantom assailants and attackers. And there are a number of cases from the Montreal slasher of the 1950s to the Halifax slasher in the 30s to the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, cases where communities have been inundated with fear with all of these people being attacked. But as it turns out, police eventually conclude there was no attacker. And there's a lot of these cases throughout history. And in particular, recently, it's the needle spiking panic that took place in the UK and in Europe. Looks real on its surface, but when you start delving beneath the surface, over 2,500 reports to the police, a handful of people arrested, no one convicted. And there's a reason for that.
Does the book include anything about the claims of the mass poisonings of the Iranian schoolgirls?
Absolutely. I got death threats over that one, but I put it in anyway.
Okay.
Good for you, Bob.
Wow. All right. Well, we're out of time. I want to thank you again for doing this on such short notice. It was fun, and I hope people who watch it learn something. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.